So let's keep moving and we'll go to the second game. And here we have the trim function. So the trim function removes all spaces from text except for single spaces between words. And so again, we'll look at the syntax and we'll say that trim equals trim is how we start, open parentheses, and then the word or the text that we want to trim spaces from. The argument is text, and that's the text from which you want the spaces removed, as we just discussed. And we'll look at this example below. Over on the left, we can see pretty clearly that I've got extra spaces here before some of these names. And you start thinking, what are those doing there? This is a little less obvious, but over here we have extra spaces behind the titles of these people. And I don't want those extra spaces, so I use a trim function, and that just removes all of them and keeps the space in between the first name and the last name. Over here it's a little harder to tell because again the spaces come after, but if I were to copy this and then just kind of paste special values real quick, I can click in here and then go to the right and see, yep, I don't have any more extra spaces there. I am good to go. And that's what the trim function is designed to do. So you may be thinking, when am I ever going to use this? In my career as an accountant, ran into this a lot when I would be importing data from other sources. And I don't know why or how, but extra spaces seem to get into data that's been exported all the time. And it's a great time to use the trim function when you're trying to import or use data from other sources. It's particularly helpful if you're not finding an exact match in your data for functions like VLOOKUP or match. We're not going to talk about the VLOOKUP or match functions today. They're a little more advanced, but it is worth noting that there are functions in Excel that try to find an exact match between two cells. And if there's an extra space in one of those cells, it's not going to find that exact match. Excel isn't smart enough on its own to get rid of those extra spaces. It requires that you use the trim function to do that. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about on the trim function, and we'll move on to our third function, which is concatenate. And the concatenate function, up at the top for the description, joins two or more text strings or cells into one cell. So what this is doing is it's bringing information from multiple cells in together to one cell. If we look at the syntax for it, we have equals, then the word concatenate, and then our first argument is text1 separated by a comma, and then text2. If we look at what those arguments mean, text1 is required and it's the first item to join. We can join a text value, we can join a number, we can join a cell reference. Do want to point out that if you want to join just text, you need to wrap that text in quotation marks. And then text2 and so on are just the additional text items you want to join. And you can join up to 255 items. So let's look at the example here below. In this case, I have 3 different cells for John, Kyle, and Harris. And that's a full name that I want to join together. So if I look at my function, I have equals concatenate, and then I have the first cell reference, followed by a comma, followed by quotation mark, space, quotation mark. So you may be thinking, well, what are you doing there with that quotation mark, space, quotation mark? Essentially, that's just a way for me to put a separator between these 3 cells, and I'm manually putting in a space bar. And I need to wrap that space bar in quotation marks to indicate to Excel that it's text. If I want to go to the very end of this and add more text, I could add a comma and then quotation mark. I'm going to add a space and then the word junior. And if I hit enter now, I can see that I'm mixing both cell references and also hard-coded text to come up with a fully concatenated cell here. So moving down to our best practices, there is an alternative to using the concatenate function, and that is to be able to join things using an ampersand. So in Excel, if I want to not start with equals concatenate, but just want to dive right into equals and then my cell reference, I can have my ampersand there. I can use that same quotation mark and put text within it to have some text in there, and join each of these different cell references directly with the ampersand. as opposed to using the concatenate function. As we discussed in the very beginning with Jeff, or as we discussed with Jeff's question regarding different versions of Excel, in newer versions of Excel, like 2016, concatenate has been replaced with the concat function. It does the same thing, it's just a different word. And again, it's an example of Excel always evolving and trying to keep you up to date with the latest and greatest. So with that said, we'll move on to our fourth function, and that is the if function. So the if function is one of the most widely used functions in Excel, and it allows you to essentially perform a logical test and return one value if the test returns true, and a different value if the test returns false. So we'll look at our syntax. Again, we start off with equals, and then the word if, open parentheses, and then we want to put our logical test. This is where we really get into those comparison operators, checking to see if something's equal to, greater than, less than, and so on and so forth. If the logical operator results in it being true, you go down the true path, and that's the next argument. And if not, you go down the false path, which is the final argument of this function. So again, we'll look at our arguments. The logical test is the condition you want to test. The value, if true, is the value you want returned if the result of the logical test is true. And the value, if false, is the value you want returned if the result of the test is false. We'll look at just a couple examples here. And the first one, we're checking to see if these two cells are equal. So I have a function that says if F25 equals I25, put the word match, otherwise no match. In this case, it's pretty clear that A does not equal B, and so no match. I'm going to jump down to this one that says if this cell is greater than or equal to 70, put the word pass, otherwise put the word fail. In this case, because 65 is not greater than or equal to 70, we have a fail. So you can spend some time looking at the other examples, but this is the way that the if function is able to work. And that's all I wanted to go over on the if function. So we'll jump into our last function, which is the len function. So the len function returns the number of characters in a text string. It's a really handy and really simple function, but the syntax for this is equals len, open parentheses, and then the text you want to check. And for the arguments, the text which is required is the text whose length you want to find. Please be aware that spaces do count as characters. So in my examples here, in the phrase how many characters are in the sentence, we have 41 different characters. Arnold Schwarzenegger is 21 characters. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious comes in at 34, and I'm going to need a breath before I do this last one. But we have the name of Pablo Picasso, his full name, which actually is Pablo Diego José Francisco de Paula Juan Nepomuceno María de los Remedios Cipriano de la Santísima Trinidad Ruiz y Picasso, is 122 characters. So hopefully I got that right for any Spanish speakers out there. If I didn't, I apologize. But it's a long name and a lot of characters. This len function is particularly helpful when you have to account for character limitations and basically whether something will fit or not. And anyway, I've used it a number of times. It's a handy one to have in your toolbox. So what we'll do now is we're going to return to our slides and do a quick recap. So we talked about the sum functions with the sum function, which allows you to add cell values. We talked about trim, which allows you to remove unnecessary spaces. We talked about the concatenate function, which allows you to combine text together or join information from multiple cells into one. We talked about the if function, which allows you to perform logical tests and then return values based on the results. We also talked about the len function, which allows you to calculate the number of characters in a cell.